Welcome to this week's Into the Wilderness podcast. And I cannot believe we're sitting in this is the beginning of our podcast room.
I was wondering if you're going to bring that up, because this, not only are we recording the intro in the new podcast room, we actually recorded the podcast you're going to hear today in the new podcast room.
It sounds good in here.
Actually,
because it has all of our gear in it, so it kind of, it's the natural dampener.
Yeah. We've got a coffee, a rub.
We've now got baseball caps.
Baseball caps, oh yeah. Go and check out our baseball caps, our Embrace Your DNA baseball caps on the website. Our mugs, t-shirts, a whole heap of other paraphernalia.
Game seasoning.
Yeah.
And
whiskey. We've got some whiskey at the top.
Lots of whiskey at the top.
Boots. Yeah. A whole heap of prizes that we need to give away for the photo competition. Yeah.
So there's been it's really cool, and I think in the coming month or two, potentially we'll have some actual studio mics here.
Potentially. And we mentioned this at the start of I think we mentioned it at the start of this podcast, but this place where we're recording has an awesome view. Because we used to record it next door in the office, which you can't really see anything because you're kind of just surrounded by trees. But from here, you can see all the way up into the Angus Glens.
You can. I can see where my bees are from here. My second lot of bees.
And rain coming over the hill.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. It is one of the best views in this part of the world.
Well, it sits pretty close to our heart because we've lived here most of our lives.
But it really is, though.
No, it is. It's the start of the Highland Fault. That's what we're looking on, all the way north and west. So you are going to be hearing from Dr Craig MacIntyre today. He is a fisheries biologist and the director of the S District Salmon Fishery Board and the Rivers Fisheries Trust as well, the Esk Rivers Fisheries Trust, which I am a trustee on, and I have been pretty much since its inception, which I think is almost 10 years ago now. It's going to be a really intriguing discussion going from salmon farming at the beginning to habitat restoration at the end.
We cover the full spectrum.
Yeah.
It really is interesting.
Even if you're not into fishing, this is not a fishing podcast. If you're just interested in the natural world, you're going to enjoy this.
You will, definitely. Yeah. And Craig has extensive knowledge when it comes to fish farming and everything else, because that's what he studied.
I didn't fully appreciate that. Actually, the initial bit of discussion, I didn't realise just how well versed and knowledgeable he was on that. So yeah, great to have him on the show.
We have a few things on the list.
We do. The first one is the winner from the competition 2 weeks ago, which was to win the very last of our latest edition Hornady reloading manuals. It's not quite the last one, because the last one I've kept for myself because it's what I use and I'm not giving it up, but it's the last one that we're going to give away. And the winner for that was, and I'm really sorry if I butcher your last name, Helen Nakilny, I think is how you say your name. Congratulations, you sent us, we asked everybody to send us a picture of you in the countryside with your best friend, whatever that might be, dog, person, and we got a horse.
I like that.
Yeah.
Thinking out the box a little bit.
She was obviously riding on the back of a horse, and it was in a country lane, and there was a whole heap of sheep. Obviously, I don't know if she was herding the sheep, but they were all on this road. So thank you very much for the entry, and you are the winner. So please contact us, and we will get the Hornady reloading manual sent out to you.
Pretty damn good prize.
And of course, we have another competition. I think we've got so many hats, I think we're going to give away two.
Okay, let's give away two.
A pair of Hornady baseball caps. Always very popular. Yeah. I have like 3 or 4 that I use all the time.
And these competitions are coming to an end.
Yes, people.
Of this type, so there will be no more.
No, there may be the odd random one, but there's not, sadly, going to be a competition every episode. I don't think.
No.
We'll definitely have stuff to give away.
We will, but it will not
at this frequency.
We've given away stuff at hell of a rate.
Yeah. So if you've never taken part in the competitions before, do it now before it's too late. I think end of July it'll all be wrapping up, and when we get to that point, we're going to do an explanation about how we're moving forward, or maybe a bit before how we're moving forward with the podcast. But really exciting stuff.
So how do these 2 lucky winners get their hands on the Hornady reloading? Reloading? No, it's not a reloading.
No, that was
their
2 weeks
cap.
ago.
That was 2 weeks ago.
Hornady baseball cap. Pretty simple, but we are actually going to ask for some knowledge here. We want to know, where is your go-to place for buying your punting, fishing, outdoors gear? Where do you physically go to purchase?
Or
gear?
online.
Yeah, or online. Yeah, anywhere in the world. We just want to know. So we'll put up a post, so you can either comment below or feel free to email Daryl. What's the email?
Podcast at paceproductionsuk.com. It will be in the description. Yeah, we want to know, small or big. Doesn't matter what it is. Anywhere in the world, we want to know where you go and get your outdoor gear and what they supply and things like that. So, yeah, shoot us a message, social media, or email us, and
we'll probably pick a winner at random.
Yeah, we will. I think so. Two people.
So yes, please, we want to know. So get entering the competition.
Even if you don't want
the hat, and of course you do, you can always give it to a friend.
Yeah.
Patreon.
Yes.
Do you know what that is?
Do you know what that is? No, I do. I do. Been around for a wee while now.
Quite a while, I think.
Yeah, it has. Patreon is a platform that allows people to give money to another individual or causes that you like. And after...
It's kind of like crowdfunding.
Kind of, yeah. And after many years of
we're in year 4 now, by the way, people.
4 years of podcasting. We've started a Patreon page, and the reason for doing that is actually it has come from some of our listeners asking how they can support us. So we decided that we would start a Patreon page because that would be the easiest way if people wanted to support us. And the reason why, the support's amazing because it allows us to do these shows and do more in-depth shows, spend more time on the editing, and potentially going forward bringing out more shows. Our goal is to bring out one a week. At the start of the year we told you that things would be changing with the podcast for the better, and they have. We've got a new podcast room, new studio, and guests are going to be coming from all over the world, and we're going to be doing more recording in person. We don't want to do that many over the internet or the phone, as little as possible.
And some from the field as well.
Exactly.
Totally new format for an additional podcast.
Yeah, so we want to do some more of the kind of investigative journalism, so it's more in the field, kind of as you go.
It'll feel more like a kind of BBC Farming Today, but not quite, but more informal than that.
Yeah, so this is where it's come about, and we are in the process of big news, as in with what's happening with the podcast, probably in a month's time.
Yeah, probably. I think so. Maybe even next show.
Maybe even the next show. But that aside, we've set up a Patreon platform where people can give money, and we've had three people.
We only launched it
yesterday. And we've also had, separate to Patreon, people actually donate money to us directly, and that all goes towards the podcast.
Yeah.
Because to give you an idea of how long it takes, and this is the other thing, is we always want the podcast to be free. It will always be free. So if you don't want to give money and you can't afford it, that's cool.
No problem.
There's no problem. It will always be free, but it's for the people that go, you know what, I can spare £2 a month or £5 a month. I want to do this. It allows us to bring a better show, do more of them.
Even fly guests up
if
it warrants it.
Yeah, fly guests. If we need to go to London, there is a guest that we have to get on. That means we can spend the £40 on the flight to go to London and do the interview in person, and it is way better. So that's kind of the thinking behind it. And you do get some rewards for the Patreon.
You do.
So what are they?
So this is how Patreon works. Is it's got a tiered system. So we have 4 tiers. So if you give up to, it's all in dollars because
you can't change it.
You can't change that. So if you give up to $5 a month, you just are part of the community. You don't physically get anything, but you know that you are helping to support us make the podcast. If you give up to $10 per month, you will obviously be part of the community. You will get a podcast shout out for your support. So everybody who is up at that tier, at the start of the shows, we will shout out your name, assuming you want to.
Or whatever you want us to shout out.
Or whatever you want to shout out as one of our supporters, and we'll shoot you a podcast sticker. For the next tier, you get everything in the previous tier, but you also get a 5% discount code for our shop, of which there's an increasing amount of stuff on, and a signed limited edition print. And for the next, that's $15 a month. And for the last tier, They've all got cool names, by the way. So the first one is Into the Wilderness Friend. The second one is Conservation Hero. The $15 a month one is Conservation Legend. And the last one is Conservation Hall of Fame, which is $25 a month. And you get all of the above, plus preferential invites to any live events that we do, a podcast t-shirt, and an Into the Wilderness baseball cap.
And those are cool. The baseball cap and the t-shirt. That's worth it right there.
Yeah,
sign up for
absolutely.
the year.
So there are all those options. So if you just look for
We'll put it in the description as well.
And if you want to navigate or have an overview, a slightly better overview of the podcasts that we have on the list, I have been and I am still updating the podcast page on our website, thepacebrothers.com. So if you go on there now, there's nice pretty pictures and links to the Patreon and links to a few other things related to what we talk about within the podcast. And I'm going to try and make those better. That's one of the things that this is going to allow us to do, is spend more time on stuff like that. So I can put links about things that we discuss in there and just flesh out the description on that. So definitely worth checking out the website for it.
And like we said, the reason for this is because of the amount of time that it takes. Like, we would love to spend more time on descriptions and things like that, where you go, this part of the podcast at minute 44, we discuss this. We simply do not have the time because to tell everyone how long it takes. A 3-hour podcast, let's say, which we have done on many occasions, takes about 6 to 7 hours to edit, potentially. Mm-hmm. And then on top of that, you've still got the 3 hours of actual podcast that you've recorded. So you're looking, in terms of work, you're looking at least 1 day for one podcast, one full working day per podcast.
Plus any sort of pre-research. Some of them don't require it, but some do.
Some do. So when we're putting out 2 a month, then you're looking at potentially 3 full days a month of just podcast editing.
And what we might end up doing, depending on how everything goes, is we might end up actually outsourcing the editing and getting a company who does that to do it for us, potentially, so that we have more time to do recording.
Yes.
Yeah, but we'll see.
So yeah, we thought we would share with everyone what's going on. We're open and honest here, and that's where the money would go. It would go all back into the podcast.
100%.
And we're not living off the off the proceeds of the podcast. It just doesn't happen. But yeah.
But we appreciate everybody who listens, which is more every month. So welcome if you're new.
Welcome if you are.
And go and check out Patreon.
Yes. And I was going to say, and we have like some of the most awesome listeners, because you look at the money that has been raised from the charities work over the last couple of years that we've done.
Oh yeah, I've actually got the numbers on this.
A huge amount has come through the podcast.
So you guys are awesome.
You guys are absolutely amazing by giving us money for charities which we make sure the money goes to the right places. And now we're holding the food ball up. No, I'm really joking. We're not.
So actually, I have the numbers now. So most people who are regular listeners will know that we were running an auction to raise money for pangolin conservation. And I finally added up all of the money that has come in from the auctions. And it was £2,400.
£2,400. How amazing is that? And to put it into perspective, Scott Country did us such an amazing deal on the wildlife
10 camera
cameras,
traps, or 8 camera traps,
and the thermal imaging unit, which they sponsored, that we still have quite a large chunk of that money.
Well, we still have £1,700 in cash, and I messaged the professor as part of the African Pangolin Working Group and Francois the other day and said, look, I've added it all up. This is what we spent with the gear that we had to buy that I brought over to you guys. We've got £1,700 sitting in the bank account that is yours. Tell us what you want. Do you want the money, or do you want us to get more equipment, like try and get some deals to get more equipment for you? So they're thinking about what they need to work on the ground now. But what a difference it's going to make. And it already is.
By the way, our goal was to set them up with camera traps.
Yeah.
That was it. And we set them up with camera traps, a thermal imaging unit, and we still have loads of money left over. Like, that's the best case scenario.
Yeah. So, yeah, really great, everybody who spent money on that, and very importantly, every single either individual or company who put up the items to actually auction.
Yeah, without
that, it's not possible.
It's not possible.
And I will be putting a new page on the website, which is dedicated to all of the links or stuff or fundraising that we do for conservation, and all of the details of everybody who helps out in that is going to be there. So a list of all the companies that gave us products will be on there too.
I just realised we didn't actually read out the Patreon page. How do you get to it?
Do you know what?
It will be in the description, but I
think you can just search it. So when you're on Patreon, you can search and you can find it.
How do you spell Patreon?
It is Patreon and then .com/Pace Brothers.
There you have it.
I think. I'm trying to find
We'll have a link on our website, will we?
Yeah, it's already on the website. So if you go onto the website and go onto the podcast page of our website, thepacebrothers.com, you will see there's actually a Patreon logo, and if you click it, it takes you straight there.
There you have it.
Already one step ahead of the curve.
Okay.
Two other things that I wanted to mention just before we jump into this podcast is the next volume of Modern Huntsman is going to print. Tyler is literally, as we speak, Tyler, the editor-in-chief, is flying to the printer to get the first proof.
I love it.
Well, we've had a scroll through it this morning, actually.
Yes, we have.
The final version, and it's going to blow you away.
It's looking great. We've had lots of orders of Volume 2 over the space
and a lot of pre-orders of Volume 3.
Yeah, over the last few weeks. And like we said, get your orders of Volume 2 in now. Because,
3.
Sorry, no, 2.
Oh, 2.
And 3, obviously, because we've sold out of Volume 1 and we don't know when the next batch is coming of Volume 1. So you don't want to be in that situation with Volume 2.
There are some incredible stories and writers, and photography is going to blow you away.
Outstanding.
I can't wait. I'm sure very soon, probably in the next couple of weeks, there's going to be some imagery out from within the book so we can actually show you what it's going to look like. So I'm excited to share that with you.
But I mean, if you like the first two and you like the imagery, you're going to love the next one.
And here's the cool thing. Quite a lot of guests that we've had on in the last 12 months are in this next volume. Yeah. So Brett Sang, he has a great article in it.
Eduardo?
I'm not sure if Eduardo's not in this
There's
one.
There's pictures of him there.
Lost my train of thought there. Jack Evans from Bear Trust, he was in the podcast 2 weeks ago. He has an amazing article in there all about delisting and grizzly bears. So there's some fantastic people in there.
Yeah.
So I can't wait to share it with everyone. And the last thing that I wanted to mention was, if you hadn't seen already, Botswana last week reopened elephant hunting again.
It did indeed.
Now the details of this I am definitely going to bring you. I think we probably do need to do a news item, and I can run through and flesh that out.
Maybe next week.
Yeah.
Maybe in a week's time.
And I'm probably going to be over there fairly soon as well, getting some interviews and audio from the field. And it makes more sense to actually do that from the ground. It's largely been celebrated by the hunting community, and it hasn't been celebrated by pretty much everyone else.
The president of the Botswana basically told the Europeans to go and shut up and look after their own place.
Yeah.
Because he said, why do you care so much about an elephant when there's loads of other things to care about, basically. And it's highly regulated.
Oh, yeah, it's not... The way that it's been portrayed negatively in the media is that there's going to be sort of a mass unregulated slaughter of elephants in Botswana, which is so far from the truth. It is going to be incredibly restricted and done for all of the right reasons for...
All the stats, we will bring them, but all the stats are online of the reasons. In fact, the president put up exactly the numbers of the reasoning behind
the current population, how much they want to, how they're going to select the animals, the negative impact of high densities of elephants in areas. It's all there. In fact, it's to some extent stuff that I covered in the podcast that I was interviewed on.
Yes,
the Talk Nerdy podcast, which I know a lot of you have listened to, and you should go and check out if you haven't. It was out last week. But yeah, we'll bring more detail of that in the coming weeks, and certainly while I'm over there again.
I've just been in Germany.
Oh yeah,
just come back.
Whirlwind.
It was. It was a bloody tiring few days.
That's Robux for you.
Oh, horrendously. The one day I was so tired.
You didn't nod off in a high seat?
No, I didn't actually. You can't.
It's easily done.
But when you're working,
I know,
if you nod off, you would miss. Like if I'd fallen asleep, then the wild boar that was there for maybe a good 8 seconds would have been missed.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was good. I was doing filming and photography over there. A beautiful part of Germany. I don't actually know where.
Where did you fly into?
Dusseldorf, and then it was a place called Simmer. It's in the middle of Germany.
Okay.
And it was a good few days. And then the week before, like I mentioned on the previous podcast, but right at the end, the week before, I was doing thermal imaging with a drone for the whole week for the German Game Conservancy.
But in Scotland.
Yeah. And we found quite a lot of nests. On the first night, I wrote it down in my book actually. On the first night, it was 11 nests we found.
Including golden plover and curlew, right?
Yes, which they've only ever found. Before I found the golden plover nest, they'd only ever found 2 other nests in 5 years. So I found the third, and they're really hard to see. The eggs are tiny in them, but using that technique, which we've kind of mastered now, of looking, you get an eye for it, of what to look for. It's successful, and the German Game Conservancy certainly find it a valuable asset.
That's good. Interesting work.
Yeah. Well, I'm yet to see anyone else do this kind of wildlife surveying using this technology.
Maybe more in the future. Maybe.
It's quite expensive, that's the problem.
Yeah. Anything else before we let people jump into the show?
No, I was trying to think, what are we up to in the next few weeks?
Tidying up a few projects. I'm going to try and get some of the pictures out from my trip to Africa. I've just started to edit some of them. And hopefully some video. I just hope I'm going to have enough time to put some video together, because it wasn't for anybody or anything specifically, but I took a whole heap of video content for future projects and just to bank some stuff. But I'd like to share a little bit of it with people, so I'm going to try and edit something together, and I'm actually in the process of cutting a slightly more intricate in the field podcast together from all the pangolin conversation we had in the bush.
That'll be good.
Which I'm looking forward to doing, and I've never done it like that before. It's quite a lot of work, but it's going to be. I'm really looking forward to it. There's going to be music, and it's going to be like editing a film.
To see that.
Yeah, so that's going to be me before probably heading back to Africa fairly soon for a pretty big project, which I won't talk about now, but I'll probably talk about on the next show, or maybe when we do the news.
I was going to say thank you to all the people that have been buying the seasoning. We've sent out so much seasoning in the last week. And if you don't know what we're talking about, we have just brought out some game seasoning on all purpose game seasoning, which gunpowder, and
appropriate.
We have actually been developing it for a year with Joe from Game Changer Barbecue, and it's been going down really well.
I had a message from Hungary yesterday, asking, can we send some there?
We will send it anywhere, but you just need to... I don't see any issues with it being sent abroad, because it's kind of raw.
I think we have some already being sent abroad.
So I don't see any problems with that at all. The only thing I would add, and our way around this in the future, is that the postage and packaging is, I would say, relatively expensive, but we have no way around that. So like the seasoning is the price, and then I think it's £3.50 for postage and packaging, but we're not making any money from that. That is the cost. It costs £2.80 to send it, and then the rest is the packaging. And the way around it in the future is that we're going to be bringing out a line of seasonings, like 4 of them, and we would be able to send all 4 for £2.80, because you can send 2 kilos,
or buy more stuff.
Or I was going to say, or you could just buy more from the shop, and we're going to have little refill packets, which will hopefully be posted for cheaper.
Yeah, it should be.
So yeah, we're trying to navigate that to make it as cheap as possible for people, because postage and packaging is the killer of all items.
Especially small
items. The only way around it is, like Byron said, is you can order up to 2 kilos of stuff for exactly the same price.
Yeah,
our shop works that out for you. You don't need to
you don't
sit there with a calculator
and add it up. How many kilos am I at now? With that said, I think we'll let you jump into the show. Well, we'll welcome you to the show, Craig. Welcome to the Interwilderness Podcast. It's great to have you on. I was just thinking the other day when we were saying we're going to try and get you on the podcast. was when we first met, and it was through I think Andrew Graham Stewart. He had spoken to you and arranged us to come and interview you for the film about Loch Maree that we made.
Absolutely.
Which I think was 4 years ago.
And I met you on the film in Loch Maree because it was edited here, and I saw you loads of times. So when eventually I did meet you in real life, I felt like I'd already met you.
That was at the launch at the Scottish Parliament as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, in Holyrood, no less.
In Holyrood, yeah, it was very good.
What was that? I mean, you have to cast your mind back a little bit now.
Was that how many years?
No, I think it was 3 years ago. You know that.
Yeah,
it could be longer.
Time goes too.
It was 4 years ago when we filmed it.
Yeah,
it's not been 4 years.
No, sorry, 3 years. 3 years ago when we filmed, 3
bit
years, and then 2 years ago since the launch. Just over 2 years.
At that point in time, you were involved with which organisation on the other coast of Scotland?
I was involved with the Argyll Fisheries Trust and District Salmon Fishery Board.
So what was the connect with you from Andrew for being involved in that film that we did about Loch Maree?
Well, my degree at university was fish farming, and then I worked in the Argyll Fisheries Trust where there's an awful lot of aquaculture. So I spent an awful lot of time dealing with the impacts of aquaculture on wild fish. And I think that they wanted, when Andrew Graham Stewart asked me to take part in the film, they wanted somebody who had a doctorate. So I had a doctorate in aquaculture.
So at least it sounded like you knew what you were talking about.
Dr Craig MacIntyre. It makes all the difference. And also I wasn't intimately involved with that area, so I was more about the general effects of aquaculture.
So it was a bit more impartial, just what are the effects, here's the evidence we know as it stands.
Yes, yeah.
So your degree was purely fish farming?
Yes. Yeah, it was
I didn't even know you could do that.
So what did you do as an undergrad, as a matter of interest?
Aquaculture.
It was aquaculture.
At Stirling University.
At Stirling, where I studied, but
exactly.
not aquaculture.
No, well, I started off doing marine biology, and the opportunities were a lot better in the aquaculture department at the institute.
It's quite a good department, that, at Stirling.
Very good.
Plenty of stuff in the pond to go and look at as well.
I think the aquaculture department then, whoever it is that heads it up, is responsible for all the species that are in that lake.
Maybe in the past.
Or maybe you.
No, it wasn't me. I know. Yeah, it's coarse fishing. There's pike.
There's pike, and there's some giant goldfish the size of whales.
Yeah, it was all those experiments that they were doing in the genetics department, and then they just released them all into the pond.
Anyway, so that undergrad, and then what was your process after that? Did you go and work, or did you go straight on and study?
I went straight to do a PhD, and the opportunity was there to do fish welfare and water quality, and it was just two areas that I happened to be interested in, and I went through quite a large interview process. There was a lot of applicants
to get into the PhD.
Yeah, it was funded by the British Trout Association.
Wow!
So it was all to do with rainbow trout. I think I visited just about every single rainbow trout farm in the UK.
I did not know there was a British Trout Association.
Yeah, it's the counterpart to the Scottish Salmon Producers Organisation.
Huh.
But they're mainly active down in England, but that's where there's a lot more trout farms. But it's a lot more commercialised in Scotland. They have the bigger farms.
But you're talking about for food?
Yes. Yeah, no, for food and for restocking.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so quite often you go to salmon farms, and they have their fish that they're producing for the table, they call it, and then they have the fish that they're producing for restocking, where the focus is on producing good quality fins rather than having a good growth.
Oh, interesting. Huh. So that makes perfect sense why you were involved in the fish farm aspect of it in terms of research then, because that is 100% tied into what they're interested in.
Yes, yeah, it is. And I think I'd worked with the fish farmers as well. I knew a lot of them, but I also understand that the way they work. And then I'd looked in detail about sea lice issues, which is the main impact on wild fish. The fish farms.
Give us a little rundown about that discussion that we were having, those couple of years ago, and what you were trying to get across in terms of the impact of fish farms.
Because it's hard in a film when you've only got, how long is it? It's
7 minutes.
6 minutes, and you've only got a short piece to make it as concise as possible.
And it's also very topical right now. The fish farms are getting a pretty hard time, I'd say, in the press. I'm not making judgment either way, just at this moment in time, but what we like to do is try and have, as best as we can, a level-headed, honest discussion about what do we know, what are the facts that we can make our decisions on.
I think that the main issue at that time, and it's still going on actually, is we know that salmon aquaculture causes an explosion in the sea lice populations. Sea lice are naturally endemic to the area. I mean, it's often seen, especially on the East Coast, when you get a fresh run fish coming in
like
and
a
it's got sea
prize,
lice
isn't
on
it?
it.
It's like getting a
got sea
salmon
lice
with
on
a
it.
gold medal on it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Whereas on the West Coast, when you see a fish coming in with 50 or 60 sea lice on them, it's a death sentence for that fish, and it feels very different. So we know that sea lice are there naturally, but fish farms trap trap salmon in their cages, and it causes an explosion in the numbers of sea lice, in the levels in the sea. The sea lice then spread into the sea, where they infect wild fish that are passing through. So there could be salmon smolts as they're heading out to sea. So these small fish are maybe 12, 13 centimetres long. They're heading out for a journey that's going to take them, carry them for thousands of miles. And they're picking up these sea lice, and they can't get rid of them because they can't enter fresh water where the sea lice will knock off.
Drop off. Yeah.
So these sea lice then are latched onto these poor little smolts. They head out to sea, and many of them will die because they're simply
just the burden.
Just the burden.
And the stress.
They'll get eaten. They'll get eaten from the outside, basically, and it will allow other secondary infections to come in.
Do they actually feed on the blood?
They feed on the skin.
It's the skin.
Yeah.
Okay, which allows infection in.
So that they'll go through the mucus, they'll take off the mucus, which covers the fish, keeps them healthy. Then they'll graze on the skin, and it allows infections to come in. And then, but some they can be so compromised, they can have so many lice on them.
I've seen some horrendous pictures.
Yeah. Well, I've seen the fish.
Yeah.
And it's heartbreaking, absolutely heartbreaking.
So I mean, this is undeniable. The fish farms admit that this is an issue. The lice problem.
Certain farms admit that they do create lots and lots of background levels of lice. What they have been arguing is that it doesn't affect the population of wild fish.
Okay.
That's where we've come into dispute with the fish farmers. Now, what we were trying to get when we were filming 3 years ago, what we were trying to get across was that the regulatory system is failing because there are no regulatory powers for Marine Scotland or for the Scottish Environmental Protection Agency to protect wild fish, and that differs from just about every fish farming area in the world. Actually,
I was a way to just ask you, and if you knew if that was different in different parts of the world, but you just answered it.
Well, take Norway for example. They have specific limits on the number of lice that a farm can have, but they also measure the wild fish populations, and if the impact gets above a certain level, the farm has to close.
So you've had, I mean, this is a crazy situation because we have a large amount of Norwegian fish farm owned on our west coast who they know it's wrong because they're doing where they're based in Norway. They're not allowed to do it, yet they do it here because they get away with it.
Yeah,
it's not
because the regulation
is not correct.
Yeah.
So to some extent, just to play devil's advocate, you can't blame someone for working within the regulatory framework that exists. Where's the issue? Is it a regulation issue?
It's a regulation issue, but it's also a responsibility issue.
Yeah, there's a moral issue there.
There is a moral issue, but also if you look at how the salmon farmed salmon is marketed, they make a big issue about the low environmental impact. They're growing it in this fresh, beautiful, clean waters. I mean, the waters.
Animal welfare is a big
fantastic
thing that we can touch on as well.
Yeah, I mean that was obviously my area, but they do have a moral responsibility, and they make a big thing about being good neighbours, and often, in many cases, they are. And many farms don't have any impact, but lots of farms do have impacts, and they're not being good neighbours.
But that's because there is certain farms which is, I mean, you can look at it on a map, which are not in the correct position. They shouldn't be where they are, and if they had been moved or thought about a bit more, then the impact would be lower.
But it goes beyond that. So yeah, you're absolutely right. They're in the wrong location, but they're also producing lots and lots of lice.
Yeah.
So it tends to be far too many lice. Yeah. And it is having an impact on the wild.
Are the stocking density numbers in the farms greater here than they are in other places?
No,
they're about
the
same.
It's not a stocking issue.
Okay.
No, it's not. The amount of the biomass of fish that they can have on the farms are very tightly regulated.
Okay.
But the amount of space that the nets have, the densities are quite low actually. But yeah, it's just the number of cages, the number of nets, and the number of farms.
Yeah.
So where have we got to from when that film was made, which was to highlight the issue of primarily one particular farm on one system, the Loch Marie system? 3 years has passed since then. What's kind of happened in the interim? We've had a couple of podcasts on it. Corin was on. We had a very extensive, lengthy podcast with him about it, so we did dive in some detail. But what have the changes been that you've seen over the last few years, and are we seeing more changes? It certainly seems to me, if you look at the sort of the media coverage of it, in even like the last 6 months.
Well, a lot of noise came of the BBC Panorama thing that was only, a week ago, 2 weeks ago?
Yep. And then a little bit off the film we did that Sir David narrated.
Yes.
Because that was in the papers. So
well, they only picked up on the fish farm
part
thing,
of it, yeah.
which was probably the smallest. It was mentioned once in the whole thing.
That wasn't an anti-fish farming.
It wasn't an anti-fish farm thing, but that's what all the papers picked up on.
Yeah, I think I was sitting when that was aired at the Fisheries Management Scotland conference.
Which one?
The David Attenborough film. I was sitting next to a fish farmer.
Yeah.
And he was very uncomfortable.
Was he?
He focused in on the fish farms.
He did. But it was one thing in a list of like 5 or 6 effects.
It was. I think what has changed, what the biggest thing for me is that the Parliament has cottoned on to this. So there's been 2 parliamentary reviews. There's one from the Rural Connectivity Committee, and there's one from the Environmental and Climate Change Committee. They've had 2 separate reviews, and both of them have concluded that the status quo cannot be allowed to continue. So
there's an acknowledgement that it's negatively affecting the external environment.
And also that there are large gaps in the regulation. And I think that is absolutely clear that there are large gaps. There's no legislation to protect wild fish. There's only legislation to protect the welfare of the farmed fish.
Which is crazy, because you think that the natural resource should always come first before you shove in something, a foreign, well, not foreign, but something
an artificial
environment.
Absolutely.
The natural resource should be protected.
Yep. Yeah, but I think it's a bit of the industry is a bit of a darling of the government, because it's the fastest growing industry in Scotland.
And you see this when any argument comes up. The first thing that typically is mentioned is the economical benefits of it in Scotland, and particularly the rural employment. That typically is the first thing they bring up. But you can very easily counter-argue that and say, is the destruction of a whole ecosystem worth a few hundred jobs?
Economics can't trump all else.
And the frustrating thing for us is it's unnecessary. There are many farms that run very, very well. They're in the right place. They have a limited impact on the seabed, which is one of the big issues. And it's
the waste on the
bottom. And to be fair to the Environmental Protection Agency, Scotland has the tightest regulations in the world for the seabed.
Okay,
they're fantastic. So we're protecting crabs and polychaete worms and starfish. So we're not protecting salmon.
It's the
and
mid-water, so we're really bad at the mid-water stuff.
Yeah, because it's difficult to measure. It's difficult to monitor because fish move around. Starfish will be lying on the seabed. Yeah, exactly.
So I've got a question then, because I've stopped eating salmon. I haven't eaten salmon for years.
I'm the same.
And the primary reason for that is that, one, in most rivers you can't kill the fish that you catch anymore, which is fine. So, that avenue is gone for me. But secondly, I can't buy fish from a fish farm that I can feel good about. Is there a list of fish farms that exist right now that I can say, I do not mind buying it from this fish farm because I know that they're ticking all the boxes and they're not negatively affecting the environment and the wild fish? Because if there was a list, I would buy salmon from them if I knew that the welfare of the fish and everything was, up to spec. But as it stands right now, I don't know where to look to find that, because I would love to eat salmon again, but at the moment I'm not comfortable eating it because of everything we've discussed.
Yeah, I don't eat farmed salmon either. No. And I felt it would be hypocritical if I was criticising them and then I was consuming their product. No, there's not, because I think there's no list. There's no list to say, if you buy from this company, it's fine, because each company has got good sites and bad sites.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. And there's a little bit of a legacy issue going on there about sites that they used to have in from 30, 40 years ago that they'd bought, that they're in the wrong place. But they haven't got the flexibility. Scotland has got a capacity issue with salmon farming that Norway doesn't.
Because they've got a million fjords.
They've got a million fjords, and when I said earlier that a farm would get shut if they were having an impact on wild fish, it's not a problem because they just go and move to another farm.
Okay.
That's easy. They can't do that in Scotland,
No.
and maybe that's why
Yeah.
they resist it so much more about the impacts on wild fish. So no, there is no list to say that these
Okay,
farms
well, I'll
are
just have to
okay.
continue not eating salmon then.
Yeah, I think you could download the data
And try and figure out
and try and
yourself.
figure it out yourself, but it doesn't give you the whole picture.
No.
Which is
Also, I'd be very hungry by the time I worked it out.
Yeah, I would stick to lamb.
Yeah, yeah, it's a frustrating one, that, and that's what I always say to people. Until we can be in a position where we're comfortable with the impact, or it's not negatively impacting anymore our environment and our wild stocks, just stop eating salmon. It's not that difficult to do. It's a pretty much a luxury, eating salmon.
It used to be a luxury. I can remember when it was a luxury. Now it's been sold as an everyday meal, and
Okay,
people
well,
are
yeah.
eating it in huge numbers. And it's almost like, oh, I'll just have salmon tonight. I'll have a couple of fillets, and it hasn't. But the
Because the
impacts on
prices
the
come down.
environment, yeah.
Yeah.
But you almost have a, with terrestrial farming, you can see the cows. You can see when cows aren't healthy.
Yeah.
You can see sheep if they're not looking well. You can't generally see the salmon,
No.
and you can't see the impacts because they're quite subtle.
And once it's filleted and you've got this pink slab
it
of meat,
it
you
looks
don't know
fine.
what it looked like on the outside.
We were discussing the other day, and the way that we have, figured out fish farming, the best way to describe it is it's the way that battery chicken farming was 20 years ago, 30 years ago, with too many chickens in a cage, massive welfare issues, and then it all got regulated.
The only thing with that was that there was no external impact on that. But
no,
yeah, there is a big animal welfare
I'm talking
issue.
about a welfare issue here.
Yeah. But I think with salmon farming, a lot of the issues come to you can't control your environment very well.
Yeah.
So if the water temperature goes up and you have an algal bloom, at the moment they've got huge issues in Norway to do with algal blooms.
Yeah, it was in the paper yesterday.
Yeah, exactly. And about 8 million salmon killed or
Killed,
something
I
like
did
that.
see that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was just very quickly.
But it happens on the west coast as well. But it's not. It's not as extensive, I think, and it's not as well reported. But you do get the algal blooms. You have issues with, as it's getting warmer, there's an organism that's turned up that causes amoebic gill disease. And that is very widespread across the whole of the west coast, and that's only come up in the last 6 or 7 years.
So can they not absorb the oxygen through the gills anymore?
They struggle to absorb the oxygen, but the knock-on effect is that you can't stress the fish out, so it means you can't treat them for sea lice. And so they get lots and lots of sea lice, and I think that's what happened with Corrin's, the footage that Corrin took in Loch Rogue on Lewis, that they couldn't get in and treat those fish because they were struggling so much with amoebic gill disease. The sea lice get out of control, and then you have these massive impacts that are very visual on the wild fish.
But the algal bloom problem, it's probably something that's only going to get worse because it is getting warmer. You can't.
It's a temperature thing.
It's a
isn't it?
temperature thing.
Yeah.
And algae thrives in warm, stillish water.
Yeah.
And
We even see it in our freshwater here in the summers.
So it is a problem that's going to continue to get worse.
So what does that mean? They have to move the fish farms further north?
They have to move them offshore and self-contained. They have to be.
I was going to ask you about that,
Yeah.
self-contained. Just before we get self-containment, I was just thinking as a comparison here. We were talking about all these 8,000 fish lost, and we're talking about tens and hundreds of thousands of fish across fish farms here and in Norway that die every year and are put in holes in the ground, I think, probably. Can you imagine if that was...
Some of them do get processed for fuel, I think, from my understanding.
But
They get
still, just
biofuel or something.
think of this comparison for a minute. Hundreds of thousands of sheep and cattle die in Scotland every year. If that doesn't happen, and we put them in holes or turn them into fuel, would we be okay with that?
Well, we had it with the BSE.
Well, that was a
foot to mouth.
That was like that wasn't an every year thing. That was a.
But it is every year with the fish farm.
But it is every year with the fish farm.
Yeah.
But would we be comfortable with that if that was the way our agriculture ran?
It's because it's a fish.
No,
Yeah.
we wouldn't be comfortable with it.
It is. It's a fish, and this is one of the issues with fish: is people don't empathise or relate to fish.
100%.
I did fish welfare. That was my PhD on fish welfare, and I know that fish are sentient, and there are possibilities, which means that they can experience emotions, so they can experience fear. And I know that there are certain fish that display signs of almost consciousness.
Really?
They're almost. Some of them are so smart. But the main thing from a welfare point of view is that they experience fear. So it's not just that they detect pain; it's also that they can anticipate pain, and that's been shown scientifically with experiments. So
there are papers on that.
But yeah, there are, and this is going back 10 years when I was at university. So, but we know that, and the welfare of the animals is very important. If you speak to any fish farmer, they'll talk about happy fish, and it's just that they know when their fish are happy. Now, people don't think that about fish, and I've met a number of people who say they're vegetarians, but they eat fish. Why are they vegetarian? They don't like the animals suffering. Yeah. But they'll eat fish, and especially salmon. And so obviously the message isn't getting across, or people just don't want to know, I think, is probably the biggest thing.
I've said it for a long time.
Basically, since we've been doing this podcast. Yeah.
I don't distinguish between species. Fish or whatever. I've spent a lot of time underwater diving. I used to do it as a job. I love watching the fish. I love all the creatures under there. And don't get me wrong, some of them are really tasty. But I've never got the distinguish when people go, "Oh, well, it's only a fish." I've never got that, because it's still an awesome creature, and they have a bloody hard time. Can you imagine being a tiny little fish trying to survive with all these things? Don't take humans out of the equation.
Everything else trying
to eat you to grow to a big fish. It's incredible, the fact that they, the journey they have to take. Insects as well. Big fan of insects.
I don't think they're sentient.
No, I don't think so. But the point is,
but yeah, I mean, I think for me, I mean, you're comparing terrestrial animals with fish. The big thing when you're farming them is to give them a good life and then a quick death.
Yeah. Just like we try to do with all agriculture.
Yeah, we do, and it is. I mean, there's an awful lot of effort put into it. The Humane Slaughter Association, into working out how best to kill the fish.
How do they kill the fish?
They
paralyze them in water first, do they?
They cool down the water, and then the exsanguination is the best way. So they'll get stunned, and then they'll get gills cut.
Yeah,
that's the quickest way. So it's almost the same as terrestrial animals, actually.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
You mentioned closed containment. Now that's the other thing that comes up. All our problems would be solved if everything was just closed containment. That's the mindset that a lot of people have. Just explain the difference for people who don't know, and is it viable? Is that the direction we should go?
Okay, traditionally in Scotland, salmon are farmed in open net cages. So it's just basically a large net in the sea. Seawater can pass in and out freely. There's nothing to stop it. And then you can transfer diseases and other organisms, parasites and such like. And that's where we've come to that's where we've had a lot of the problems with salmon aquaculture. Closed containment is basically a pod of some sort that has a recirculation system built into it. So they'll take water from the depths, so there'll be very few parasites in it, and then it's pumped up and it's recycled in the pod. So you can grow salmon at sea. So the idea is you could have these at sea.
So they're like floating pods.
Floating pods, yeah. So they can be out at sea, the fish would be there. They wouldn't interact with any of the wild. The Norwegian government is pouring hundreds of millions of pounds, krona, whatever, into this. I think it is the future of salmon farming. I think if salmon farming is going to grow, and the Scottish government has targets to double the current production, the only way they will achieve that is with closed containment.
That system. But from an economical point of view for the fish farms, it's a high outlay for them, but reduced potential food, medicine, all these things for them.
Yeah, so they'll be able to control everything. It will be. I think at the moment the engineering isn't quite there yet. There's lots of different discussions. So what you could have is you could have like an oil tanker, convert that into a fish farm.
Yes. Or
even an oil rig, and you can talking about
plenty of those being
exactly. you could grow the fish, and this has been mooted, but I think at the moment the one that's most likely, it looks a bit like an egg floating out at sea, and you could have a series. You could have a series.
You have a little bit above the surface, the rest sits below.
Yeah. So I think the way that the Scottish industry is looking at this is the Norwegian government are making all the investment. Let's let them go on with it, and then
we'll just use the research. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, they are. Most of them are Norwegian owned.
Yeah, exactly.
A lot of them are. So yeah, it would make sense.
But sure the Scottish government will have no complaints about them spending money.
But we need the regulation in place at a government level to make sure that when the technology is viable, that it's enforced.
Yes.
that it's utilised.
I think a lot of the issues from the wild fish point of view would be we just do not have any confidence that if a farm loses control of its sea lice, that anything is going to happen. You can still have a situation.
You mean anything's going to happen to the farm?
To the farm, yes, absolutely. So there was a crazy situation a few years ago when a fish farm brought in a thermolyser. So they heat the water to knock the sea lice off the fish.
I didn't know they'd fall off with temperature.
Yep, they would. So they could have a thermolyser and what's the other? It's like a stunner or something like that.
Okay.
And it got a brush, but the thermolyser and there was a mistake, and the operator cooked about 20,000 salmon. They killed them instead of treating them. It was a mistake and the fish health inspectorate went out to the farm. They investigated. They found that there were signs that the sea lice on the farm were resistant to every known chemical, and the sea lice levels on the farm were massive, and the farm was rated as safe. It's fine. So it's just not there just now. The regulation is just not there to protect wild fish.
You're doing everything wrong, but you're all good.
Yeah,
It doesn't give you any confidence.
You killed 20,000 fish. You cooked your own stock before you killed them, and but it's okay. So I think even if the legislation changed and we could have some confidence that if a farm did lose control, that something was done about it, I think from a wild fish point of view, that would help an awful lot, and it wouldn't be a huge thing to do. But for some reason, it's just not happened yet.
It doesn't help that now, because of the medicine that the sea lice are being given, they're now becoming extremely resistant to everything.
There are signs of it in certain areas, yep. So, yeah, the current... And it's also the impact on things like langoustines and crabs and lobster. We're starting because...
Well,
it's the same chemical.
Yeah, it is. A sea louse is basically a crustacean.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the chemicals that they use interrupt the neural signals that within the crustacean. So it's going to have the same effect on a lobster as it is on a sea lice.
Huh.
What about cleaner fish? Because that's something that's come up quite a bit recently in terms of the amount of wrasse that are being taken out of the sea.
This is one of my biggest issues, and I've been on it.
Because they're an incredible little fish.
I've been on it, the government and Scottish Natural Heritage, about this for years.
Because they're very slow growing, aren't they?
Yeah, they are, and they're very precious.
Explain what a wrasse is to people, because a lot of people have never even seen one before, and how they get into the fish farm.
Well, a wrasse is a wild fish that you find in little rocky areas. It looks like it's been squashed in its sides, so it's quite a sort of a narrow fish. It can be some fantastic colours depending on different types. You've got cuckoo wrasse, ballan wrasse.
I've actually got loads of pictures of wrasse that I've taken because they're quite an easy fish to take pictures of, because they'll sit on the rock for you for ages if you're underwater, and then they'll go off quickly.
They're very curious fish as well. Yeah, so you can get quite close to them, and they'll often scrape algae off of rocks, and that's how they feed. But what was found, that if wrasse got into a cage of farmed salmon, then the wrasse would peck the sea lice off the fish. So it's a cleaner fish, basically.
Yeah.
Now the problem is that the wrasse, the fish farmers haven't figured out how to farm the wrasse, but they're taking a lot of them are taken from the wild. And that has been totally unregulated, and it's been going on for years. And
that's crazy.
Hundreds of thousands of wrasse are being taken out of the wild. The mortality rate of the wrasse in the cages, I understand, is quite high, so you have to replace your stock.
So it's not like once you got them, you got them.
No, and they will last maybe for a maximum of 2 production cycles, and then you have to replace the whole load.
How long's a production cycle?
22 months. So, and then they have a 6-week break in between. So I think you're allowed them for up to 2 production cycles. And then you have to kill the lot of them.
The wrasse.
You have to kill the wrasse, and then replace them.
Why do you have to kill them?
From a biosecurity point of view, in case they transfer any diseases.
Wow.
So if you think how many wrasse, and I know that I think the waters off the west coast, there aren't that many of them left, and they were taking the masses of them down from Devon and Cornwall.
Yeah. There was a programme about that not that long ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember seeing, and I can't remember where I saw it, but they were monitoring some boats that said that they weren't catching wrasse, but they actually were catching wrasse, and then they were shipping them up to fish farms up here.
Yeah.
So we could be in a position very soon where wrasse are something we don't really see much of, mainly because they've been taken.
Yeah, I think it depends on the scale of it and where, because I don't think where they're farming, where they're fishing for the wrasse, they can get in everywhere. So I think there will be locations that will be okay. But the problem for me is it's a totally unregulated industry. So they've just been told, just get on with it and do what you want. Now, what the fish farmers, they have been trying incredibly hard to farm wrasse. But they haven't.
Yeah, because that makes sense.
It makes sense. Grow your own.
Yeah.
But they haven't been able to do it. So they found another fish. It's called a lumpfish that does roughly the same job as the wrasse, and they can farm it, so they can grow their own. It's not as good as wrasse. It's not as effective. I think the mortality rate is higher as well, and the farmed lumpfish aren't as good as the wild lumpfish at taking the sea lice. But I think it's better than the alternative.
Yeah, better than nothing.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I think that I spoke to one fish farmer one time, and he said, I don't farm salmon anymore, I farm cleaner fish. And they look after the cleaner fish, and the cleaner fish look after the salmon for them. And it's become so twisted that they've almost lost sight of the original plan, which was growing salmon.
For protein.
For protein, yeah. And they've almost lost sight of this, what are we doing this for?
Because it's just industry and money.
Yeah, it is, and it's growth.
The feed that they feed salmon, what does it consist of? What goes into making that feed? And there's a reason I'm asking you this question, but I don't know exactly what goes into it.
Okay, it's changed over the years. It used to be very high fish meal and fish oils, incredibly high. But as they've become rarer, as we've emptied the seas for all sorts of issues, the fish oil and fish meal were used for pig farming, chicken, whatever, that they've had to switch to a more vegetarian diet, so it's more soya based now. I think. Yep. So.
Oh, that's brilliant. Yeah. So now we're taking it from soybeans, which also destroy the planet.
Yeah, exactly. So let's grow and probably some palm oil in there as well.
Yeah.
I don't think that. It's just, but strangely enough, though, one of the big selling benefits of farmed salmon is for omega-3s and omega-6s, which come from fish oil and fish meal. Now, if you're replacing that with soya, which doesn't have omega-3s and omega-6s, then the health benefits of salmon,
because then you don't have it in the final product, which is the salmon, or not to the same extent.
Correct.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. So is it as healthy for you as is being made out?
Now, obviously, we can't grow. I think we talked about this with corn. We can't grow soy here. It's grown abroad, so we're shipping in huge amounts of food.
Well,
from
the fish pellets probably manufactured abroad somewhere.
Huge amounts of food are being brought across here.
That's one of the things with it. When you look at food stuff like salmon, and there are other examples as well. When the input required to produce that just starts to not really make logical sense anymore, and especially if you were, before they were supplementing it with soya, you're taking a whole heap of fish out the sea to grind it up and make it into pellets, just so that you can make a particular type of protein, hence salmon, that people want to buy.
Yeah.
And the conversion rate is not good.
Well, it used to be the figure that was often quoted 20 years ago, 5 kilograms of fish to produce 1 kilogram of salmon.
What a waste.
But that's gone right down now.
Yeah, because they've changed.
Because they've changed it. So it's... So the feed, they've learned a lot more about feed conversion ratios, and they're much better now on the farms.
Because it makes sense for them, because they want it to be more efficient.
Where do you think most soy's produced? Africa?
I don't know, but I'm going to look.
So I'm interested to see where it's actually produced.
Yeah. So then
it has to be in a country that has probably low labour rates for it to be worthwhile to ship it halfway across the world or wherever it comes from.
Yeah. But salmon is then shipped across the world as well. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, China's a huge market now, and the United States is a huge market. So in Australia as well.
You finding that?
Produced in temperate and tropical regions. Key source of protein and vegetable oils.
So middle of the world.
So a lot of Brazil, Argentina.
So the rainforest is getting chopped down to produce salmon.
Well, yeah.
To produce feed for salmon.
And it amazes me how... Well, I mean, I didn't know this connection necessarily, although I'm very aware that I don't know a lot of the connections in terms of food and the impact and the negative impact it's having. But having these kind of discussions where people can really understand the impact, it's not just I'm eating salmon, I'm negatively affecting the wild fish populations because of sea lice in Scotland. Now all of a sudden we're in Brazil because of the food that you feed the salmon.
Yeah, it is just incredible. And if you think, how connected everything is as well. You know, you take the fuel to get the ships over. It's produced in the Middle East, and then that's shipped all around the world to. It's boggling. I would always go for eat local if you can.
Yeah, that's what we say.
If you can.
That's what we say.
Yeah.
Eat seasonal and local.
Seasonal, yeah. Absolutely.
And we've had this discussion loads of times. You do not need to have all these exotic foods 365 days.
You really don't.
I couldn't live without avocados.
You know what?
You're the problem, Craig.
I'm joking, I don't eat them.
I do actually.
I do eat avocados.
I do eat avocados, but we can't grow them here.
No.
Don't. You're going to make me think that I should stop eating avocados. So it's not shipped
maybe we could grow them in pods out at sea somehow.
You probably could grow them in greenhouses here, I would think.
Yeah, well, our cousin Anthony has huge avocado tree in New Zealand. But what's strange? Do you think it's just because their summers are just slightly longer than ours? Because their climate's very similar.
Just a little bit warmer where he is than we are.
Yeah. Okay.
That thing was producing so much avocados it was feeding a whole hospital.
He's a doctor. He didn't know what to do with them all.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get off fish farming. We might end up back there, who knows? And talk about what you're doing now, because you and I, along with the rest of the trustees, were sitting in a meeting last night for the Esk Rivers and Fisheries Trust, which is, that is what you fill your day to day with now. So explain what that is and what you do there.
Okay, well, first of all, it's worth saying I work for two organisations. I work for the Esk Rivers and Fisheries Trust, which is a charitable body, which is there really to protect and improve aquatic ecosystems. So that covers all species, invertebrates, all fish species, everything on the river, pretty much. My other job is the Esk District Salmon Fishery Board, which is a statutory body which has, it's kind of the official body that's there to protect salmon fisheries in a fishery district. So I have two different jobs with a slightly different emphasis, but the two do work very well together. They're two sides of the same. We're there to protect the environment, protect salmon fisheries, protect the river. Yeah, so that's how I spend my time.
And this is just for people, because we have listeners from all over the world, so that you can kind of situate this in your mind. It is the east coast of Scotland,
yes,
but south of Aberdeen, but not as far as Dundee.
Correct.
Or
perfect.
Edinburgh.
Well, yeah.
People tend to know too.
Oh yeah, they probably wouldn't have heard of Dundee.
We're kind of halfway up the east coast of
exactly.
Scotland. Yeah, we are.
The best part of Scotland. And I mean, one of the many things we were discussing last night in the trust meeting is the long list of projects that are ongoing. And I've got I've got the list in front of me here, and I thought we could cover some of them because there's some really interesting work going on. I'll tell you what I'm going to start with first, actually, and I know you weren't in position when this happened, but you've been involved in it since, was the Rottle Burn project, which was rerouting a canalised section of a tributary of the South Esk to, I think it was it 1890s or something
This
like
was
that?
being talked about 3 years ago, wasn't it?
Oh, no, it's done.
It's done now.
It's been done for quite a long time, but there's an ongoing monitoring process for it. And it's quite amazing how that improved that river system.
Yeah.
So what have you been doing since you've come into post with that project basically finished? I know there's some planting you're going to be doing soon, for example.
Yeah, well, the river was re-meandered back in 2012, so it's 7 years ago.
Is it 7?
7 years ago.
I can't believe
absolutely.
It's that long.
And the river is still adjusting to its new life. So it's fantastic.
Because it needs to settle in.
It is, and it is still settling in. And so what's happening is when it was re-meandered, it wasn't really very good for fish or other wildlife because it was all silted up. There was a lot of sand there, and it's still, you need to have the river processes in place to create the habitat that's good for fish and insects.
So
and
a single channel just doesn't...
Why was the river originally changed?
I can't remember what the reason
drainage.
was. So just drainage.
Yeah.
So agriculture, the same as
just
most of these systems.
Yep. So they want to use it for sheep or livestock or something like that.
I was going to say that river's got freshwater mussels in it, doesn't it?
The South Esk system.
Yeah.
Yeah, not the Rottle.
Not the Rottle.
Not the Rottle burn. No.
Yeah.
Not far away.
That's one of the reasons it's a triple SI.
Yeah, it's got special area of conservation. One higher.
One higher than that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I'm glad you pointed that out.
It's a special area of conservation for freshwater pearl mussel and Atlantic salmon.
Wow.
So.
And you need both.
One
needs the other.
Yeah, the freshwater pearl mussels
need the salmon. Yeah. But sorry, back to the Rottle burn. So it was straightened, and the reason why that isn't good for fish or habitat?
What was happening was that the salmon would go in November time, and they would lay their eggs, And then because the river is straightened, when there was a flood, the river would come flying down and it would basically wash away the eggs.
It wasn't being slowed.
It wasn't being slowed, but there's nothing to slow the water down, and it would just gain momentum, and you get what's called red washout. The nest of a salmon is called a red, and then the eggs are just stripped out, washed away, and they never hatch. So it's very, very poor. And you also end up with a system, and when you have a straightened system, the whole riverbed is homogeneous. It's all the same depth with the same rock types, and that isn't good for fish. Fish need diversity of habitats for the different life stages that they have. And you get that when you have a meandering river, a nice river that's got
deep edges, and shallow edges, and big boulders, small boulders, gravel.
Yeah. Riffle diversity is very good, exactly.
Yeah. It's nicer to fish too.
Yes, it makes it more interesting. It does. So 7 years ago it was changed from a straight section that was about 800 metres long into one that's about 1.3 kilometres now. So you increased the habitat by remeandering.
And this was done with the landowner D Ward, who's up there.
Yeah, Rottal Estates.
So it involved basically, in a way, sort of reclaiming land into river and some river into land.
It did. I think the area that it passes through, the field isn't very good for farming anyway.
It was pretty wet.
Yeah, it's quite swampy, so it's much better use now.
It's great habitat outside of the river now.
It is, yeah. At the time we planted a whole lot of trees, and most of them survived. But now there's long grasses and there's lots of insects, and you see some fantastic. We saw black kite there a couple of months ago actually, flying up there, and there's seagulls, and that's a fantastic area.
Wow.
But there's a whole heap of other new work going on in Glen Clover right now, which is not very far from where I live.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that.
Okay, well, what we're doing is the Glen Clover Contour Planting Project. And this is based on a project that happened down in Wales a few years ago. I can't remember the name of it, where you plant trees around the edges of the glen, so they're not down in the valley floor, they're up on the sides, and it's a way of retaining water in the catchment. So what we see now that lots of trees have been stripped out from many headwaters, when it rains, the rain just comes flying down into the river level rises very quickly, the water comes barreling down, and then half a day later the river will drop again, and that's not good for many species, not least fish and fishing.
I was about to say it's shit for fishing too. You speak to the old boys from 50 years ago who were fishing, and they all tell you that the spates used to last a couple of days.
Yeah.
On all these rivers, West Water, South Esk, it just used to last longer. That's what you're saying. The water took longer to make it to the river, and so that the level stayed higher for longer. Yeah.
So there's been, in the last 50 years ago, there's been quite drastic land use changes, or intensification of land use. So there's an awful lot of farming has become more intensive. A lot of hedgerows have gone. So what we're doing is we're planting, let me get this right, something like 160 hectares of trees along the edge of the valley, the glen. Something like 260,000 trees we'll be planting in total, all the way around. All of the landowners in the glen are buying into this. They think it's a fantastic idea. The benefits are there's going to be lots and lots of benefits. So we're mainly planting broadleaf trees, so natural native broadleaf trees. There will be some commercial forestry because these estates need to make themselves work. They need to earn money. So commercial forestry is one way, but the majority will be native broadleaf. And the idea is that it's going to boost, and it's all going to be connected as well, so that will help squirrels.
So you have like wildlife
grouse.
corridors.
So there's going to be a corridor running down the glen, basically.
That's the idea, yes.
Wow.
That's the idea.
That's quite a significant project for that area.
It's the total cost is something like £3.2 million.
Wow.
And we've started this year. So we've got the first area fenced off and the first trees have been planted. It's quite exciting. It's a project that will take quite a few years to complete. But once it's there, then I think it will have a huge impact on not just the river, because we're going to retain a lot more water in the upland area, but it's
just wildlife
in general.
Yeah,
it is.
How does something like that get paid for?
At the moment, the main way is through agri-forestry grants through the EU.
Collection tins down the high street.
But we've also...
is that going to be a problem if we leave?
I don't think so, because I think these grants will continue. I think they have to continue. Certainly Scottish Parliament, Scottish Government has targets for planting lots and lots of trees.
Do, yeah.
And this project just meets it perfectly. And it's not just even planting. There's a specific reason for planting that has an environmental benefit.
Yeah. It's not just random planting trees.
Correct.
You have a plan.
Yeah, and it's not just commercial forestry, commercial conifer plantations, which can have a negative environmental impact. These are mainly broadleaf that will be there for 80, 100 years and will have lots of knock-on benefits on birds. So I'm hoping that those grants will continue if we leave the EU. The other way we're getting money is through this organisation called Forest Carbon, and it's carbon trading.
Ah, okay. So carbon offsets for companies.
Carbon offsets for companies, and this is something that I think is going to become a lot more.
Oh, we're going to see a lot more of that.
A lot more, but I mean, it's just fantastic because they make money available. But not only that, but there's this environmental benefit to it as well. So and I think the companies that are investing in this sort of project, I think they would like to see an environmental benefit to it as well. It's not just we're planting trees to help our clients produce more CO2.
Yeah.
We're planting trees; they're going to have a positive benefit, and and it's strategic and it's been thought about. And so,
I think that's the key with a project like that, is that it's not just planting trees for the sake of planting trees.
There is a much wider benefit.
Yeah, but you guys have a really detailed plan in place of why you're doing it.
Yeah.
So when you tick that box when you're booking flights and you say, like, it's an extra 20 quid and you get to plant 100 trees, that's probably where the money goes.
Yeah.
To one of these bigger companies.
Yeah.
You would hope it would be a planned project.
I just think how good you would feel on your flight if you tick that box.
Yeah.
20 quid.
I don't actually know how much it is, but I think it is about 20 or 30 quid
I just
extra.
booked flights the other day and I didn't see that option on EasyJet.
Maybe EasyJet don't care.
Okay, I'll have to speak to them.
No, I might. Maybe I didn't look hard enough. The problem when you book with EasyJet is there's so many bloody things to tick. All I do is just continue, because I don't want to book a car. I don't want to book a hotel. No, it's fine. I don't need extra bags. I don't want to pick my seats.
Definitely.
I don't want to pick my air hostess.
For an extra £5. Definitely with some of the big airlines, BA and KLM, they definitely give you the option for the carbon offset at the end.
I actually saw a friend of ours, Ulrich, who he's a veterinary student. He must be almost finished now.
I think is he finished? He's a fully fledged vet.
Oh,
now.
he is. So he is a vet now. Yeah. But he hunts around the world all the time, just sort of on the bones of his arse, because he's done it the whole time he was a student, and he just scraped together some money so he could go to New Zealand for 6 months. I don't quite know how he had time to study, but I saw him put up a thing the other day, and he was talking about environmental responsibility and how he had offset his flights with it was tree planting of some
Tasmania.
Yeah. I think it's going to get bigger, and I mean certainly on the rivers, and especially in the headwaters in much of Scotland, there are not nearly enough trees. We need masses.
Did
more
we
trees.
take them out? We must have in the past.
They've been knocked down, yeah, and funnily enough, although a lot of the grants coming are from the EU. It was a lot of the common agricultural policy was the reason many trees were taken down in the first place.
The same reason a lot of the moors were drained.
Yeah,
back
exactly.
in the 70s.
Well, I think a lot of that. So a lot of the moors were drained so they could plant forests, plant commercial plantations.
Sticker plantations.
Yeah, it is. But there's an awful lot of work being done in Scotland just now with peatland restoration
huge
as
amount.
well.
Yeah, huge amount. It's really impressive what they're doing there.
Yeah.
It's amazing the cycles that we go through.
Yeah. It is, yeah.
Rape the land, fix the land.
Fix it afterwards. And
hopefully we're not going to end up in long after we're dead in a cycle where we destroy it again.
I hope not, because we've learned.
Yeah.
Well, you would think so.
Well, one of the issues, certainly I'm very keen on, is when I'm talking to landowners, is this legacy issue. So we have future projections with climate change that the temperatures are going to increase, and we're moving into a period where in upland areas salmon might not be able to survive because of the temperatures of the river. So we need to plant trees to provide the shade, to provide areas of refuge. And if we're saying to the landowners now, if you want your grandchildren to fish for salmon, you need to plant trees along the riverbank. And I think that resonates with a lot of them, actually. And so I'd like to see, it'd be great to see a lot more trees planted, especially along riverbanks, start to provide shade, and there's all sorts of other benefits.
People need a long term, because this is 30 years time. We need to be looking ahead here.
Yeah, I mean, but we absolutely need to do it now. Yeah,
like
absolutely.
with a lot of things.
With a lot,
right now,
it a little bit late.
We all need to be doing these things now.
Yes.
The habitat works in Glen Clovis, the same river that we're talking about. That was fascinating what you're doing there with because that section that you're about to talk about. I mean, I drive past it fairly frequently, and it just seems so dead and sterile. Like from the road when you're looking at it, slow, almost. I mean, obviously it's flowing because it's a river, but it doesn't look like it's flowing. It's pretty slow moving. The banks are all eroded. You can see these high banks that are slipping all the sand and soil and silt into the river continually, and it just doesn't look good. But you're hoping to do some work on that.
Yeah, it doesn't, and but that's not just a function of land use. That area of the River South Esk in Glen Clover used to be a lake, used to be a loch, back in just post the last ice age. It's very, very
just
flat.
where it got dammed up and
well, it did.
Broke through.
Yeah. So it's very, very flat, which means that there's not much gradient, which means that the water doesn't pick up much momentum.
Yeah.
So it is very lazy. It's
naturally speaking.
Yeah. So it's a passive meandering river, but it's also the soil is basically sand.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
It doesn't hold together very well.
It doesn't, and so the banks will collapse. But where you would in the past have had trees along the river, lining the river bank, and the tree roots bind the soils together and help to slow down the rate of erosion. We don't have them anymore because
we've grazed it right to the edge.
Or they've been taken down for other reasons. So what we're trying to do is adult salmon and sea trout, when they come into a river, they look for three things. They look for water depth, they look for cover, somewhere to hide, and they look for some shade. And those make the fish feel very safe and very happy, and they'll stay in an area. We don't have that in these sections of the river, so we're trying to find ways to replicate that. And what we're looking to do is to put trees again into the river banks and on the waterline to provide that cover. And we'll pick areas that have already got some depth, and then we'll try and plant some trees and maybe put some gorse in to try and provide that little bit of shade as well. So that's what we're looking to do. We're looking to provide areas of natural looking habitat for the adult fish.
And how long is that going to take, do you think? How long's the project?
Well, the project will take a few days to do.
I'm talking about how much river you want to cover.
All of it.
All of it.
I would love to cover. No, we couldn't do all of it, but I think we've applied for funding to do 10 areas over the next couple of years. I don't know if we'll get that, but we're certainly, two of the landowners up there are funding the first ones themselves out of their own pocket, and I've got some funding from the Cairngorms National Park as well. So to do one of the first ones as well. So what we're doing basically is putting trees into the river, and so that not only will it provide the cover that the fish need, it will also help invertebrates. And then help.
When you say trees, you're cutting trees and lying them in the river, aren't you?
Pulling them out.
You want the root.
We want the root wad as well, yeah. So we'll be pulling them out. So so we found a good use for commercial forestry, commercial conifer plantations. We'll take them out and we'll put them in the river, yeah. And we want all the branches there, so the messier the better. It will just provide, and so what that will also do. So one of the benefits is it helps the fish. It helps the adult fish. It gives them a bit of habitat. And when the river floods, having the trees in the river against the bank will slow down the rate of water coming down as well. So when I was talking about the contour planting with the trees on the side of the valley, slowing the rate of water down, by putting trees into the river, it also slows down the rate of water. So we had Storm Frank, what was that, about 4 years ago, 4 years ago, where Brecon was flooded, which is downstream on the South Esk.
Yep.
If we have these measures in place, if we'd done this 20 years ago, then there's a good chance actually Brecon wouldn't have flooded because the water would have stayed up in the upland areas.
My village flooded, Merrykirk.
Yeah, it was horrendous, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Different river, but yeah.
Yeah, but the same principle,
idea,
same idea, same principles.
And over a longer term, these I was going to call them structures, but they're not structures, they're trees that you're pinning to the bank.
Yeah.
Over time, those will eventually rot, but you will have natural growth after to replace what you're artificially putting in. Is that the idea?
Yeah, I think what we'll do is we'll put willow. We'll plant some willow in the area as well. We have to be a bit careful with tree planting there because wading birds like the area, but they don't like trees because they don't feel safe because raptors and foxes will use them.
For cover or sit on them to predate.
So we have to be a bit careful. We'll speak to the RSPB about that. But what will happen eventually, you're right, the trees will rot down, but the silt will gather, they'll collect sediment and they'll just firm up the riverbank as well. So, yeah, they'll be there for a long time, I would have thought.
What is there going to be a monitoring process so that you can see, okay, today it's X, 10 years' time after implementing it, we can see how much better it is. And it has to be because of what we've done.
It's difficult to measure it because what you would normally do is see how many more fish are spawning in the river.
But they're not spawning in those sections, really,
But they can't because the substrate of the river isn't suitable to that. It's very sandy. But so what we're really just creating is an area for the adult fish to feel safe in.
Yeah.
And then they'll go somewhere else and spawn in more suitable habitat. We're going to try and create some more spawning habitat using slightly different methods in other bits of the river. It's a bit more, it's using trees again, but they're used in a slightly different way to try and collect some gravel that the fish can then use to spawn with. Yeah, we're going to try that as well. So I suppose that the measure of the success will be if people are catching fish. That's going to be our big... If people go to that pool and there are no fish there just now because there's nothing for them there.
There's no reason for them to stay.
Yeah, but if people start catching fish, then I think that's been a success.
You'll know they're holding.
Is there anything else like this going on this kind of scale in Scotland?
Yeah, a lot of other trusts have been doing this. The fisheries trusts, yeah. But I mean, it depends in different areas. Can be done in a slightly different way. I mean, we're having to adapt to the very sandy soil we have here, but the actual method itself, I think, has been pretty well accepted. Yeah. Like to the north, we have the River Dee. They're putting large root wads into the middle of the river, and it's a similar sort of thing. They're trying to create habitat for the fish.
Okay. Just to kind of scour out and change the flow.
So these areas that maybe they're a bit straightened, the river is all the same depth. If you putting other structures in the river, I suppose it's how weirs worked as well, but this is using natural materials rather than concrete.
Yeah, it's a bit better, I think.
I think so.
It's less permanent as well, and it allows the sort of natural change of the river to happen.
Yeah,
because there would have been lots of bits of trees and I mean, we pull them out now.
Yeah,
because it gets in the way of whatever we're doing, whether we're canoeing or fishing. So we yank all that stuff out the river. But there is definitely a place for it because that was part of the natural cycle. I
think there is, and I can remember a river, one of the rivers I worked on. There was a lovely pool, and it had a tree in it, and there were lots and lots of fish there. And the angling club took the tree out, and then couldn't work out why they couldn't catch any fish.
Change the habitat.
The fish didn't like it, and they moved somewhere else.
It's funny how we do that as humans. We like to change the habitat so it's more convenient for us, but maybe not fully comprehending the consequences.
It's because people are probably hooking loads of lures and stuff on the log.
Yeah, I think with fishing there'll need to be a slight different change in the way people fish or their expectations of it. I think having these immaculately preserved beats now, they'll still catch fish.
I like the more wild feel. Yeah, okay, there's a greater risk of losing a fish under a log or catching something, or it's a bit more inconvenient because the run's not quite as perfect, so you can't fish it right from the top anymore. But to some extent, does it really matter? Especially if we're actually doing something good. I mean, you look at the sort of proper backcountry wild fishing in some places like in North America or in New Zealand where basically nothing's manicured, and you just deal with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And if it's better for fish, I'm all for it.
Yeah, I think so. But having those trees in the river, I think the Wild Trout Trust, they have a saying that fish grow in trees, which is something that we tell the kids.
It's a good saying, that.
It is. When we're doing our education projects, that's the sort of message we get across, that trees in the river are natural. They should be there. Fish have evolved in many cases around the trees in the river as well. So by taking them out, you're simplifying the habitat, and you're not going to be able to produce as many fish.
You think as well, on certain rivers, you see the roots of the trees in the river, and they create this amazing habitat.
Like mini ecosystem there.
And there's always small fish in the roots because nothing else can really get in there.
Yeah, quite often, part of the work with the Fisheries Trust, we do electrofishing surveys, so we do surveys of juvenile fish. And where you have those trees with the roots in the river, you will find all of the par, all of them in there. So you'll find nothing else in the other 9/10 of the river, and then underneath the roots, that's where they all are. So it's obviously something that they prefer as a habitat, and we need to start providing them for it because a lot of rivers now don't have tree cover.
I don't know why I just thought of this, but years ago when I used to fish the Brecon Angling Club section of the South Esk, there was one particular pool there that was full of sticklebacks. Do you come by a lot of sticklebacks?
Yeah.
Are they naturally in the river?
Yes.
Anyway, they are.
Sticklebacks are natural.
Yeah.
What we do see, I mean, sticklebacks and eels, and at the bottom of the river you'll see a lot of flatfish as well, I would imagine.
Oh, yeah, in the brackish areas.
Or even in the freshwater as well. What's not natural, certainly in this part of Scotland, are minnow, which are the bane of my life.
Do you find them in the rivers here?
Yeah.
How do they get here?
They were brought in as live baits, and then at some point... And then,
even live baits for the rivers?
Yeah. And then at the end of the day, someone will have been fishing and just chuck them in, just to get rid of them and throw them into the river. And now they are everywhere. And stone loach. We see a lot of stone loach as well.
Yes, you do.
Yeah.
Plenty of them. I've seen them in the Westwater.
Yeah. So we were down at Marykirk doing some fishing the other day, and we saw lots and lots of minnow and lots of stone loach.
There's nothing we can do about it.
No, they're there now. But
are they a food? I mean, there must be a food source for trout.
Yeah, they would be.
The stone loach are bloody fast, though.
Yeah. But the good thing is that with the minnow, certainly they tend to shoal in shallow water as well. So it's keep the herring happy, I think.
Oh yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah,
and maybe the kingfisher.
And the kingfisher. Yeah,
we've got a kingfisher just here. I've seen him quite a few times this year.
Nearly every day I hear the kingfisher on the
river.
Really? Yeah, it must have a nest because it fly up and down all day.
This year I've seen him more than any other year, so it must be nesting and feeding somewhere.
Yeah, it seems to have started earlier.
You think so?
This year, yeah.
I've not, I can think of the amount of times I've seen a kingfisher. I can think of them in my head, so it's not been that often.
Right.
But this year, like you say, every couple of times I go down, I see it flying up and down, which is great to see.
I love this, the iridescent blue, as if,
it's
especially
so strange.
if you look above. Oh, it's brilliant.
Because we're not used to that here. You know, in other countries where there's lots of colourful birds, you begin not to notice it. You become numb to it because everything's colourful. But here we don't really have any colourful birds. So when you see that just vivid blue streak coming up the river, it catches your eye, and it's incredible.
In fact, I had one of the gillies on the river the other week said they saw 2 mandarin duck on the river. Now they're not native. I don't know where they came from, but he said he was looking at them and they were flying funny. And then when the sun got the right side, he saw the kind of yellowish. They've got quite brightly coloured heads, the mandarin ducks.
I'm trying to think now.
Reds and yellows.
I'm gonna have to look it up. What? Just talking about it was when you mentioned herons there, that made me think of it. Predation issues that we have, or not even issues, but potential predation conflicts with. I mean, we've been talking about species which are struggling for many, many different reasons, not just in the rivers, but more often actually out at sea, and us not 100% knowing what happens to them out at sea before they're coming back. Mm-hmm. The migratory components we're talking about. What predatory issues are there? I mean, there's a lot of things that predate on fish, and is there anything that we need to be looking at more or having more discussions about? I
think we are having those discussions, and we have them with Scottish Government and Scottish Natural Heritage. The big issue in the rivers is from fish-eating birds. So we have the sawbill ducks, which are mergansers and gooseanders, and we have cormorants. And they are huge, huge problems. I think what's happened is, in the past, gooseanders are a relatively recent addition to this area. They didn't arrive here until the 19th century, 1870s I think it was, where the first gooseanders were spotted up in the Tay. So they're relatively recent, and I think they were controlled by the gamekeepers on the big estates for years. Cormorants, mergansers and gooseanders were all controlled.
Back in those days they could,
and they killed.
And there was no regulation.
Yeah, they killed golden eagles and sea eagles.
Yeah.
Absolutely everything. I'm not justifying it. I'm just saying this is what happened.
Yeah.
And in 1981, the regulations were brought in to protect these species, and the numbers have grown and grown and grown and grown. Now they eat fish all year round, but especially in the springtime they'll target the smolts, so the fish that are heading salmon and the sea trout. They're heading out to sea. Because they
tend to shoal.
They tend to shoal, but also they turn silver at that time of year. So
they're easy to spot.
They're easy to spot, yep. They tend to travel at night time in sort of March, early on in the season, so they're not too bad, but sort of late April into May they'll be travelling through the daytime. And one cormorant could eat in a day, 15, 16 smolts. And we count the numbers of cormorants on the river about 80 most times.
So that adds up.
so every single, so eight, this is just cormorants, and then you have your goosanders and mergansers, which their populations will vary. So the numbers, and there's been a lot of work done on the River North Esk to look at the diet of these birds, and we know that mergansers and goosanders on average eat about 8 smolts a day, each one. So if you have 200 of these birds on a river, so 200 times 8, that's 1,600 smolts a day over maybe a 60-day smolt period, and you start to run into tens of thousands of smolts are eaten in a year. Now, the river produces around about 200,000 smolts, the River North Esk. We know this from previous work.
As a percentage, it's huge.
So
as a percentage, you're talking about maybe 40%. This is before they even leave the river. And then they head out to the river, and then they've got many thousands of miles to swim.
Poor things.
So, with that knowledge, the argument could be that, yeah, okay, I mean, that's nature, right? It's a bird that eats fish, and it has a place or needs a place too. Mm-hmm. What is the counter to that argument? What are their populations like? And this is one of these discussions that's so difficult to have in a kind of pragmatic way. When I look at it, this is a little bit like, I think, the issue, although maybe some people in certain sects of the conservation movement would disagree with me. It's a little bit like the issue with the pine martens and capercaillie, where you have one species that is really struggling, another species that is protected and had been struggling in the past, has recovered a lot, and you can't really do anything about either of them, but it looks like we're really struggling to hold on to the capercaillie. The pine marten's doing great, but you can't kill the pine marten.
Yeah. Funnily enough, I was speaking to the RSPB about this, who manage a capercaillie estate up north. And they found out that they had been shooting foxes as a pest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But then they found out that the foxes were controlling the pine marten, so they stopped shooting the foxes.
Well, that must be an admission that the pine marten's also a problem.
Well, they were a problem. Yeah, they were for the capercaillie. So I think man has totally destroyed a lot of the environment, and we pretty much have to manage everything now.
Yeah.
Cormorants, for me, are seabirds. They should be eating out at sea. They shouldn't really be in the river.
So are they up here just because competition on the
it's easy.
shore?
It's easy prey, and there's just not enough feeding out at sea as there was. There's not enough. I mean, they should be out at sea.
So, like you just said, the argument of, well, they're natural birds, so they should be, they should be left alone. You can't have that argument anymore because there's too much going on at sea for these fish. So we have to look after them here because this is the only point that we can look after them.
Uh-huh. And the species of goosander is a relatively recent addition to the shores. They're having a massive impact as well, and they'll be there on the river all year round. So I think there's a migratory portion to these sawbill ducks, and then there's a resident portion. Mm-hmm. I'm not quite sure the numbers. Since I've been here, they do fluctuate, and the timings of when they turn up fluctuate as well. We are limited because certainly around about May time, that's when they start having their eggs and rearing their young. So there are restrictions about when we can control these birds, and the numbers that we control are very small. But what we do in the North Esk and the South Esk is it's like a smolt shepherding. So it's not just shooting to kill, because we have very small numbers we can actually kill, so we have to come up with something else, and we've been doing shepherding where it's scaring tactics as well. So when the smolts are running, you keep the birds moving, you scare them, shotgun blasts or just loud noise, or even just dog walkers. They'll keep them off the river, and you try and let as many smolts down the river and out as possible. I think I can understand why these birds were protected in the first place. I think it's probably gone too far now, and the populations are too big that they're having a large impact on the smolts, on the salmon and sea trout populations. Now, that's not saying that all of the problems are down to these birds. There's a huge problems out at sea, but if you're losing 40% of your stock before you even get out to the sea, then you've got a problem.
Because those numbers, in my head, you go, for me, you'd be like, okay, it would kind of be acceptable to lose 10 to 15% in the river as you go down, but 40 is...
Yeah. And that's just to one predator.
Yeah, that's what I mean, that's just one thing.
Well, maybe two different bird species.
Yeah, it is incredible. And I think we need to find a balance. We're having discussions with the Scottish Government. certainly they're taking.
Is there an
it very
appetite
serious.
for it? Because I should probably you did mention it, but just elaborate for our listeners that you can apply for a license, but as Craig was saying, that the number that you're allowed to control is pretty small per river. Is it per river or river system?
Per river.
So does that include all the tributaries?
No, we just tend to do. It just tends to be around the bottom in the main stem.
Yeah, because that's where they're sort of coming together, all the smolts. Yeah.
So those are lethal control methods we need a license for. We don't need them for
the shepherding,
the scaring. Yeah, the scaring tactics. And it's just, I mean, the gillies on the rivers are fantastic. You know, they'll get out at 4 o'clock in the morning, keeping the birds away, trying to scare them, keep them off the river as much as possible. So
it's got to be done though.
It does, you know, they do a fantastic job, and I think it was something we'd like to see expanded, but I do think that the populations are just too big.
Too big.
I do.
It's just an honest discussion. You know, it really pains me that it's so hard to have these discussions without people getting overexcited and animated about it.
Yeah.
In an emotional way, rather than having a logical debate.
To be fair, I haven't really heard. Maybe it's the circles I go in. I haven't really heard too many detractors about the need to control the birds or to protect the smolts. Maybe that's...
No, I mean, I haven't really heard it either, but in the same token, then you would think that we would have more licenses to control more.
Well, I think it's controlled at the moment by Scottish Natural Heritage, and they look at it very much from the point of view of the bird population. So licenses are issued on the point of view of how healthy are the birds.
They're not really what's their impact on other things.
What's the impact on the fish?
Oh, that's interesting.
And I think there are, I mean, as with everything to do with humans and what we do, there are economic concerns. So there are the fisheries, you know, there are jobs, people's jobs, they rely on having good fisheries. Now, if you're losing 40% of your stock, and that's against a background of record low marine survival rates, then it's compounding error upon error.
And if you don't have good fisheries, then you don't have them paying into the board, and if you don't have them paying in for salmon, then you don't have the work being done to maintain the rivers. Exactly.
This is one of my big issues. I had a philosophical discussion with a journalist a few years ago about fishing, and she thought it was cruel and unnecessary, and why is it done? But if you look at, I'm sure you've covered this in your podcast before, it is the people who hunt and fish that care the most about the species and the environments. And you need those people there, otherwise it would just be exploited for other reasons.
Well, because you couldn't, and we discussed this before, you couldn't expect, it wouldn't happen. You go to every dog walker that uses the track along the North Esk or anything, you need to pay £5 a week to walk on this. Oh, what's it for? It's to maintain the river. I'll just walk somewhere else then.
Yeah, exactly.
You need people with vested interest.
You do. And, you know, the anglers are your most passionate people about the salmon stocks. Absolutely, you do need it, and it goes beyond that as well. You know, there's the impact on local economy from hotels and restaurants, and absolutely, you know, the trickle down effects. I think in the North Esk, when the last study was done, the fisheries were worth about £2 million to the local economy.
Well, I mean, you just got to look at the pub in my village. Fishing must be one of their biggest percentage of customers going into the bar, and then they also have a lot of people that come in for the shooting on Montrose Basin.
Yeah, although the fishing finishes, all the shooting season opens, and then that fills their hotel for the rest of the season.
And then obviously there's all the little bits in between, but whenever I go there on a Saturday during the fishing season, the bar is full of fishermen. Yeah, full, and I just show if that was gone, potentially could close.
I know, yeah. It would do, and it's, I mean, even angler numbers, the anglers are changing their behaviour as well now. There's maybe not as many of them coming up for a week as there used to be. Now it's come for shorter trips, and that affects the local economy. So, absolutely. But, I mean, aside from that as well, we do need to protect the species. You know, the Atlantic salmon in the South Esk is a protected species, so we need to protect it.
Yes.
And it's finding that balance. And I think at the moment, just there's too much protection for the birds, and maybe not enough understanding and protection on the fish.
People are probably interested in what you do on a kind of day-to-day basis, because it's fascinating, and I imagine people picture you being out on the river every day, which
you probably sat in front of your computer.
I know it won't be the case, but I mean, we're looking out here, and you look after some of the rivers that are in front of us. We can't see them all, and it is some of the most spectacular parts of the world. Here, these little gems of rivers hidden everywhere. So, what is it you kind of do on a day-to-day
You're right. I don't have a set routine. The people who are out on the river every day are the water bailiffs. So we employ 2 water bailiffs. They basically enforce the fisheries legislation, but they do more than that as well. They check that any problems with the river, any pollution incidents. What I split my time between the Fisheries Trust and the Fisheries Board, so it'll be managing the staff, it'll be a lot of administrative work, which is very boring, but I also get to do fun stuff as well. So
that's the stuff people are interested in.
That's the stuff I like to do.
Electrofishing, yeah.
Well, yeah, we're doing an awful lot of electrofishing in the summer, but we're also doing the habitat improvement works in the river. I'll be involved in that, so that needs to get set up, but it also needs to be designed, and you speak to lots of different people about how best to do these things and where to get the trees from. So I'll do that kind of work. I'll help with the putting them in as well. We've got education projects running at the moment, so we're been down the river and helping people with that, taking cubs fishing.
And schools
as well.
It sounds like from the discussion last night that's being a really great success and making youngsters really enthused about the river.
Yeah, what we're trying to do with the education project is getting kids out of the classroom and down to the river and just to experience what it's like down the river, and give them an understanding what's in the river. So it's not just the fish, it's showing them the birds, kingfishers and squirrels, and there's bats and invertebrates as well. But mainly, it's just getting the kids out of the classroom and into the wild.
Yeah.
And they absolutely love it. But this
It'd
is
be the highlight of the week, of the
probably
month.
a month.
Yeah, it is, and it's incredible. There's a place, there's a school in Brecon that we're going just now, and the head teacher, it's only 6 miles from the coast.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
and the head teacher was telling me that there are kids in that class who have never been to a beach.
You've got to be joking.
And let alone down to a river, and it's just they seem very cut off from it, and it's just incredible. And you bring the kids down to the river. We've got one of the local fishing owner of a fishing beat has given us use of his fishing hut, which we've converted into a classroom, and it's absolutely brilliant, and the kids absolutely love it. And there's just the questions that they ask. I love them. I love the way that kids' minds think. They're about 10 years old, 9, 10, 11.
They ask unrestricted questions.
They ask you questions that you were probably like, I don't actually know this. like I've never thought about that before.
Yes, and that's the best thing. Yeah. And the enthusiasm of us as well. And it's such an easy project for us to do. It's just, you have a place on the river that's nice and safe for them to go down. We've got nets for them to do kick sampling in the rivers, so they get out lots of invertebrates and they get to ID them. There's a pond that they do pond dipping in as well. There's nature trails. It's just basically being on the river, and they just have an absolute ball.
What's crazy is Brecon. We both went to school there. I would regard that as a rural town, and what you're saying is, and I know that to be true, is that there's a lot of kids that have not really been out in the countryside, which is considering
it's incredible if you think
within 500 metres of the outskirts of Brecon you can be in fields.
Yeah.
But I do understand why that doesn't happen. But what chance do kids have in bigger towns and cities across Scotland and particularly England and the rest of the world have when you could be potentially 100 miles from the coast, or in the United States or other parts of the world, 1,000 miles away from the coast, and
to learn about their real environment.
So why would I care if I've never seen a beach before with litter all over it,
or even seen a salmon?
Well, I think this is by exposing the children to this and talking to them, and the kids they are sponges. They just soak up so much and they ask so much questions. They get it very quickly. So there's a problem with kids littering on rivers, and but if you teach them about, you show them plastic in a river, and they hate it. So it doesn't actually take very much to get that engender that sense of responsibility and concern for the environment. It doesn't take much, and it's almost like an automatic natural response to them. It's just because a lot of them haven't seen it before. So if you take a little bit of time and explain it to them, and I must admit, we're using your video, your interview with David Attenborough at the end we do a little classroom session.
That's great.
And the kids absolutely love it. Yeah, it's brilliant. And to get somebody of his stature there telling you, look after the environment. Yeah. Okay.
I will obey.
I will obey.
It's amazing what impact David Attenborough has.
Yeah.
We just had an email yesterday from was it a museum, Darryl?
Yeah, it was a museum in
BC or
I can't remember.
I think it was somewhere in Canada.
Yeah.
Asking if we could send them the original video because they want to put it up on a TV screen in the museum.
Oh, brilliant!
Just in conjunction with the Year of the Salmon.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's amazing how
fantastic.
little things like that do make a difference.
It
impacts one person, it maybe impacts another person, makes them think about it a little bit more.
Yeah, I think so. But it as I've said, it doesn't take much. It really doesn't take much to get the kids' imaginations fired. And we took the cubs on fishing on Sunday down to a local fishery. And, they had a really good time. It wasn't the best weather. A few of them caught fish. And a lot of them were saying, I want to keep doing this. How do I keep doing this? And that's, it's easy for us to take kids and introduce them.
Yeah.
But, we'll put them in touch with a local angling club. They've got a junior stage. It's the next stage. And, if their parents don't fish, how do they get out there? And, but how do they actually go fishing next time? So we're working on that as well. That's very...
But these small little things at that age might spark interest for their entire life in aquaculture. It is the kind of career that I would have certainly enjoyed going into, as becoming a diver and spending a lot of time underwater. Is it a career path that you would go, yeah, you should, if you're interested in this, you should go and...
Can you recommend it, Craig?
Could you recommend
aquaculture?
It? Well, it does not necessarily aquaculture, but that
area.
World,
science. Yeah.
Well, when I speak to people who work on fish farms and you ask them what they enjoy about it, the big thing for them is the setting, the environment. They say, there's dolphins swimming past, there's whales swimming past us, we see seagulls and ospreys, not seagulls, sea eagles and ospreys, and it's the environment. But when they grow the fish as well, they do care about their stock. It's funny that most people that work on fish farms are really good people, really decent people, and they hate to think that they're having a negative impact on environments. This is kind of going back to the impacts on the wild. They hate to think about it. And I think maybe some of them are in denial. Because most people think they're good people, don't they? Mm. It's a natural human, you think you justify what you're doing. And you hate to think that there's any negative impacts on it. So, the way things currently are, I couldn't really recommend anyone to go into aquaculture. Why don't you go into get fishing and get hunting?
Just go fishing instead.
Go fishing instead. Try and get a job as a ghillie.
Yeah.
Or
there's a lifestyle choice for you.
It's far more rewarding. You are doing good.
With what is your sort of crystal ball vision for the future for salmon and sea trout here in Scotland? Because we talk... a lot of the stuff we see is very negative. It's very easy to just feel like it's a bit of a lost cause. And yet, I know, like you, there are lots of people like you doing great work around the country to help protect that.
Yeah.
What is the future for it?
I think the future's good, actually. I really do. I think the rivers are improving immeasurably. If you look at all the work that's been done, a lot of the focus that's been done, it's coming from Scottish Government all the way down through that to improve the water, the water quality. So if you look at the state of the freshwater of the rivers, yes, there's work we can do, and we are trying to do it. It's difficult to get funding, but we're trying. Where we are just now on the River North Esk, it is in fantastic condition, the freshwater. Yeah. It is basically a fish-producing machine. And it is the most productive river in Scotland.
Which one, sorry?
The North Esk.
North Esk,
is the most productive river in Scotland.
It's overtaken all the big ones. I think.
So
I knew it was doing well, but I didn't realise it was the
it's short, but pound for pound, it produces... It has targets. The government has given it an egg target of something like 8.3 eggs per square metre, which is the highest in Scotland. So, and it's in really good condition. There's things we could do to make it better. There's some of the, when it goes through farmland or previously straightened sections, we could re-meander or we could plant more trees in the upland area. I think as far as the fish populations, so the main thing affecting salmon populations just now and sea trout is what's happening out at sea. And we're in part of a natural cycle just now. What the really low densities, the really low poor marine survival rates we're seeing now happened about 100 years ago, and it happens every 100 years or so. It seems it's in a natural cycle.
So we're in a dip.
We're at the bottom. I think we are.
So you think
just
that's
now
compounding other issues that we're having?
I think there are other issues. So certainly, there's never been as much human impacts as there are just now. But there's also other things like seal populations are on the increase. They'll have a bit of an impact on salmon. They'll be catching salmon as they come back. I think the big sea fisheries, these big factory ships out at sea,
Yes.
they must be having an impact.
They have to. It
They're
seems
colossal.
Yeah,
it's not conceivable that they're not having an impact.
And I think the increase in the mackerel fishery, because mackerel and salmon tend to inhabit roughly the same part of the water column, so the mackerel fisheries, I think, must be having some impact on salmon as well.
competition?
No, just getting caught in the nets.
Oh, I see what you mean.
But there is a competition. There is a Norwegian scientist has
I've read that paper.
a hypothesis, the overgrazing hypothesis, which is interesting. I think it needs to be tested.
Yeah, I read it. It seemed interesting, but I wanted more to know whether I really was buying into the idea.
The problem with it is, what do you do if it is true? Do you fish more and then you catch more salmon as a bycatch? I don't know. It's a difficult. It's complicated, but there are other things going on. So the climate in the North Atlantic is changing naturally. We know that because it's part of this cycle that goes on, the North Atlantic Oscillation, that I think Mark Bilsby talked about from the Atlantic Salmon Trust. So what we're seeing kind of follows predictions, and then hopefully we're at the bottom, and then over the next few years things will gradually start to improve. I genuinely think we will see an improvement. It will get better. I think we need to be looking after the fish a lot more, or keep looking after the freshwater environment, keep that going, and maybe extend the efforts for we need to plant lots of trees on riverbanks. That's one of the big things for the future. Yeah, so we do that now, in 50 years it'll be much better.
It is important to emphasise that we have as a country come on leaps and bounds when it comes to our river systems and the quality of that, because you don't have to turn the clock back that many decades, and we were in a pretty dire state in a lot of rivers.
Yeah.
I mean, there's even fish that run up the Thames now.
Yeah, exactly.
And that was just a giant sewer before.
Yeah, yeah.
And I mean, Glasgow as well. I mean, most of the rivers that were anywhere near Glasgow were basically polluted and disgusting before, and I think they're in a fairly half
people
decent
fish on
state
them
now.
again.
Yeah, they certainly do. And where I was brought up, it was one of the tributaries of the Clyde, and we never saw sea trout or salmon. We saw lots of brown trout, but now there are sea trout and salmon running up those areas.
Shows you.
And so it has improved. And I suppose one of the classics is, starting from just about scratch, is the Tyne, isn't it? In Newcastle, that's clean up the habitat, clean up the water, open up the habitat, and then the fish come back, and it's just absolutely incredible.
Sea trout's a slightly different discussion to the salmon in terms of what's happening to them at sea, because my understanding of sea trout is that once they go back to sea, they're basically hugging around our coastline in terms of feeding before they're coming back into our river. They don't have this vast migratory pool that salmon do. So the impacts on them must be different then, or the reasons we're not seeing them.
Yeah, they are. I think
they
are more susceptible to changes in feeding at sea.
See, this is what I was.
Yeah. So the last big run that we had was 2011.
Did that coincide with the big sand eel year?
Yes, but it probably it also coincided with the salmon. The salmon and the sea trout populations, the survival was huge in the marine environment. I don't know what happened that year. That was the last big year that we really had. I think sea trout, because they tend to spawn in smaller burns, more of them have been straightened. And I think they're suffering more from habitat degradation in the freshwater environment than maybe salmon are. Salmon tend to like the bigger rivers better, and they're in a better condition than these small little tributaries that are now basically drainage ditches.
Yeah. And
there's not much habitat in there. So I think that's part of it, but probably the big thing is feeding at sea. So whether we're seeing the same number of finnick, which is, just a young sea trout, we're not really seeing as many of them.
No.
Maybe as we used to.
Even in my lifetime, I remember seeing a lot of finnick when I was in early teens.
Yeah.
Up by the Eithin and the Don.
Yeah.
But not so much anymore.
No, and I don't know if we're seeing. So as I said earlier about the cormorants coming inland to feed, they're mainly marine animals. I wonder if that's two sides of the same coin. If the sea trout survival isn't great because there isn't enough feeding out at sea. Sand eels seem to be the basis of an awful lot of our food chains.
Yeah, it does.
Birds,
you look at the puffin reduction in population is mainly to do with sand eels,
Yeah.
because that's what they need. Even though if they can eat other things, when it comes to feeding their young, they need that source of sand eels, the high density of biomass of sand eels. And there was a paper I read years ago, probably 10 years ago, that was all about that correlation between sand eel fluctuations and water temperature, actually, and how sand eels had moved, the populations had moved further north where it was slightly cooler water, and the puffins following them and then not breeding in certain years when they couldn't source the sand eels. And I'd wondered whether there was also a correlation between sea trout, if you could tie sea trout into the same study they did, but I never followed up on it. But it seemed interesting at the time because the food source is very similar.
It is, and I think sand eels is the basis of the sea trout populations. And you speak to certain of my colleagues in other areas, and they're convinced this is the reason. You know, it's down to coastal feeding, and I think that.
At least we're not hoovering up sand eels to make fertilizer anymore, because we used to do that, didn't we?
We are, but there's also. Yeah, it was the Dutch and the Netherlands used to do that. But I think there's other things. There's an awful lot more mobile fishing gear going on where we're raking the seabed for longestines and other species.
Scallops.
Yeah, well, they tend to dredge for scallops, and that's even worse. That goes in even deeper.
I've seen it.
Yeah.
I've seen it when I've been underwater. There's nothing living once they dredge nothing. It's like a desert.
It's amazing that we can allow that to still happen. Actually,
I'm
dredging for scallops,
and that's why the hand dive scallops are the most friendly for the environment, because they're not affecting the seabed.
They're actually selected.
They're selected, and then they go up. I've been on scallop beds on the west coast loads, and when you land on one, it's amazing because they all try and swim away from you. It's incredible to see, but when you see the dredging channels.
Yeah.
It is. You see the sand's being pushed slightly. It's like a giant rake, and it's just gone. Everything is dead.
Yeah, and it's the same with the mobile gear for the longestines, which is essentially raking the bottom against creels.
Yeah.
And there's an awful lot of gear conflict, and it happens in the East Coast as well as the West Coast, and it's very, very complicated, and you're dealing with people's livelihoods, and it's a difficult situation. But I think if I had my choice, I wouldn't have any mobile gear. I mean, the Victorians banned it. The Victorians knew it was so damaging that they said, okay, you're not allowed to do that within 3 miles of the coast, and then it all changed in the 1980s, I think it was, 83.
Wow, learn from history.
Yeah.
Wow, to make better decisions for the future.
Well, we can do it now because it was the EU. The reason...
that was why it was opened up again?
The reason it was opened up, as I understand it, was that Spanish, French and Irish ships started coming in fishing when we joined the Common Fisheries Policy, although the Scottish boats weren't allowed to do it. And they said
this isn't fair.
So instead of banning the other boats, we just allowed the Scottish boats to fish in those areas now. And there's very little. If you look at the Clyde, for example, it's the whole biomass, the whole ecosystem has changed. It's switched from cod and haddock to whiting. And now they're fishing for brown shrimp in the Clyde, which is just crazy.
We cannot afford to make the same mistakes we made in the past, because we're going to make enough new mistakes in the future. Yeah. We can't repeat old mistakes.
I know. Well, we haven't even fixed these ones
yet. No, exactly.
We know it's damaging. Yeah. We know it's harmful, and I mean, I think the benefits of going back, there'd be banning these mobile gear. You'd potentially more employment. There's the Sustainable Inshore Fisheries Trust made a very good case for economic benefits from stopping all this mobile gear. But unfortunately, vested interests won out.
As is often the case.
Craig,
it's been a fascinating discussion. Thanks for taking the time to come into the office today.
You're welcome. It's been fun.
Yeah, what I'm wondering is when we're going to have our trusty yearly walkout on one of the rivers. Because I seem to miss them every year.
We can try and do it in June. We'll wait for a bit warmer weather, I think.
Early June. End June.
All right, next week then.
Yeah, you're right. Next week. It's June next week. It's been great to have you, and thanks very much for your time.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for listening to the show. I hope you enjoyed. And I'm looking forward to doing more shows in our new room, our new podcast room in the future, and have some more guests on. Oh, and this is why you stay to the end. In only 2 weeks' time, we are flying to London.
I was just about to mention it. I wasn't sure if you'd remembered.
We are flying to London to go and interview Levison Wood.
And if you don't know who Levison Wood is, go Google him and buy one of his books, watch some of his TV series.
All his stuff he's got TV series and he's got books on Audible so you can listen to them, and he also has the physical books as well.
Modern day adventure and explorer.
It's insane what he's done.
Do you know what? I mean, he is well known, but he deserves to be a lot more well known
Yeah.
than he is.
His books are incredibly
They're very honest.
I would say honest, entertaining, and factual, and a lot of research has gone into his
You
books.
will learn a lot by
So-
listening to them or reading them.
Yeah, so he's evidently done a lot of research afterwards. So the ones I've got: Walking the Himalayas, Walking the Nile, Walking the Andes. Is that one? Oh no, maybe that's something else. Anyway, that is definitely two.
There's a lot of walking.
There's lot. I'm going to Google it while we're on on here.
So we actually got. So he's got a new TV series coming out, which we'll tell you about. We're actually being sent some of the programs to watch ahead of it being released and ahead of us doing the podcast interview with him. So as soon as we've watched them, we can tell you a little bit about them. But we got contacted by Discovery Channel, who are who are promoting this new series with him, to see if he would come. If we would have him on the podcast, and we didn't require any convincing because we already knew exactly who he was. We were already reading his books and a big fan.
On the way to there and back from the Northern Shooting Show, we were listening to one of his books.
Yeah, Walking the Nile.
without actually knowing that we were going to be
one of those weird coincidences.
Really weird coincidences, and we actually said, you know what, he would be really cool to get on the show. And lo and behold, we're going to have him on.
It's happening.
Yeah.
Have you found it?
Okay, so Walking the Americas, that's the one I was thinking of. Walking the Himalayas, Walking the Nile, and then there's one just called Arabia. So, yeah.
He has a really good Instagram account as well, Levison Wood.
He does, yeah. The Walking the Nile's insane.
It isn't. It is just crazy.
And it's the thing that kind of upsets me with the world, is there's so much of the world that you can go and see, but it's people that stop you seeing it, not anything else. It is people.
Like, that was the difference between, if you haven't heard it, we interviewed Ed Stafford, I don't know, 6 months ago.
Yeah.
And he was the first man to walk the Amazon from source to sea.
Yeah.
And there was a little bit of human issue in there as well with the drug trafficking, but most of it was just a feat of endurance and being able to just push on and cope with the environment. But in Levison Wood's journey down the Nile, it was people that were the issue.
Yes.
Oh, and they were also amazing. But where he had problems, it was very often caused by people and politics.
Yes. Which is a shame.
Not anything kind of not all the rest of the natural environment that excludes people.
Yeah, you think, when I need to walk across Africa, I'll be careful of that.
Of the lions.
No.
Be careful of people with guns.
Which is obviously a thing you do need to be careful of, but it's people with desperate people.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
But we cannot wait to go down and interview him. I think it's on the 11th we're interviewing him in London.
Yeah, not long now. With that, join us in potentially a week's time, but we'll see how that goes. If not, it will definitely be in 2 weeks' time. If you're new to the show and you want to discover different ways to listen, there's many ways to listen. In fact, only last week, it was one of our friends asked the best way to listen because they had an Android phone, and we sent them towards Stitcher. Mm-hmm. So that worked for them. If not, Spotify and iTunes, they're the big ones. And if you need any more information about us or the show or anything else that's going on, or the shop or whatever, it is all the W's, thepacebrothers.com. And the email address, once again, is podcast@paceproductionsuk.com.